The pressure gauge on conduit 7 read 3 points low, which meant either the coupling on junction 44 had gone soft again, or something was blocking airflow in the secondary trunk. I pulled the diagnostic tablet off my belt, checked the time, 6:10, an hour before the first Keth morning shift rotation, and decided to have a look myself before I logged the fault and handed it to one of the younger crew. 31 years in water and air systems will do that to you. You stop trusting a number on a screen to tell you what a number on a screen caused. Heron's station was mine in the way a man's garden is his, which is to say nobody issued a document to that effect, and the Keth Protectorate would have laughed at the idea. But I knew every junction, every expansion seal, every place the old conduit runs had been patched and repatched until the patch itself was older than the people patching it. I knew which hatches stuck, and which ones you had to lift and push at the same time, and which service corridors ran under which floors, and what the station sounded like at each hour of the morning when it was behaving, and what it sounded like when something had gone wrong. The Keth had been here 11 months, and they did not know any of that. Their compliance officers had binders of information about who lived where and who had applied for which transit permits, and which workers were to be rated cooperative, and which were to be flagged. They knew nothing about the station. I went down the maintenance ladder into sublevel 3. The secondary trunk for conduit 7 runs east to west under the platform approach, and the access is a hatch behind junction 42 that most people forget exists because it's behind an equipment cabinet that weighs about as much as a small vehicle. I moved the cabinet. I'd rigged the casters myself 15 years ago for exactly this reason, and unlocked the hatch and climbed inside. The trunk is low and warm and smells of metal and old sealant, and the faintly sweet chemical note that the filtration medium gives off when it's working right. I had a work light on my belt. I clicked it on, crouched, and moved toward 44. She was behind the junction valve, pressed against the curved wall of the trunk in the space between the valve housing and the conduit wall, which was maybe 30 centimeters across at its widest point. She was very small. Her skin was pale gray, the color of old ash or winter cloud at altitude, and her hair was silver and matted against the side of her head from sleeping, if she had slept, in that narrow dark space. Her eyes opened when the light hit her. They were amber, the deep warm amber of old glass, and they were enormous, which is to say her species always has eyes that seem outsized to a human looking at them, but in the pale disk of her face in the beam of my work light, they were the whole world. She did not make a sound. I held very still. She was Dalesi. I knew the species. There was a Dalesi settlement on the 3rd platform level, had been for years, a couple hundred souls running a trading house and a small repair depot that serviced interstellar cargo. They were quiet, dignified people who kept largely to themselves, and seemed to regard the Keth occupation with the particular resigned patience of a species that had been occupied before and understood the geometry of it. The Keth had been running clearance sweeps through the platform levels for 2 months. I had heard the term, resistor-affiliated, applied to the Dalesi trading house 8 days ago, from one of the compliance officers who used the word the way some people use a stamp, pressing it into things without pausing to see if it fits. I looked at the child, she looked at me. "How long have you been in here?" I said, keeping my voice low and even because the trunk carries sound and I was not certain what was above us at this hour. She didn't answer. Either she didn't speak the common tongue or she was, wisely, deciding not to speak to a stranger who had just shone a light in her face at 6 in the morning in a service conduit. Both were reasonable. I sat down on the floor of the conduit trunk, which is not comfortable at my age, and turned the work light so it was pointing at the junction housing rather than at her. Softer, less interrogation room about it. I gave it a minute. "My name is Soren," I said. "I work here. I've worked here a long time." Nothing, but her breathing had slowed a little. "You don't have to talk," I said. "I'm going to fix the junction seal on 44 and then I'm going to leave. I'll leave the hatch unlocked. You should eat something. I had a ration bar in my kit pocket. I put it on the floor of the conduit between us, not too close, not offered directly, just placed there, and turned to the junction housing and started working. The seal on 44 was cracked along the lower ring, exactly as I had suspected, and I had a replacement in my kit because I had suspected it. I pulled the old seal, cleaned the seat, pressed the new one into place, and ran the diagnostic check. The pressure reading on my tablet climbed back to the correct range. I noted the repair, noted the time, and did not note anything else. When I turned around, the ration bar was gone. She was still there, watching me, a small amber-eyed figure in the dark of the conduit. She had eaten whatever it was. I hadn't heard her open it, which told me something about how careful she had learned to be. And now she was watching me with that steady, unhurried day-lessy attention that in adults reads as composure, and in a child, this age reads as something older than it should be. I'll leave the hatch as I said, I told her. The cabinet outside is on casters. If you push the hatch open and then push the cabinet from the inside, it moves. The corridor outside is empty between midnight and 500. I'll make sure there's something in the kit pocket by the hatch each morning. Don't go to the platform levels. I didn't tell her why. She already knew why. I climbed out, replaced the hatch without latching it, and moved the cabinet back into position. Then I went upstairs and started my day. I told no one. I want to be clear about what I understood in that first hour, because people have asked me since in various ways whether I understood the stakes. They frame it as a question of courage or of calculation, whether I chose to protect the child out of some principled moral stand or whether I simply failed to think through the consequences. The truth is neither and both. I understood the stakes. The Keth Protectorate's policy on unsanctioned harbor was explicit in the occupation bulletin that had been posted in every common area of the station. Anyone who concealed a person designated as a clearance subject faced the same status. Designated, in the particular bureaucratic language they used, as a cooperating subject for immediate processing. I understood that. I understood it as clearly as I understood the pressure reading on the gauge and what it would mean if I ignored it. I also understood that there was a small child hiding in my maintenance conduit who had eaten one ration bar in what I estimated from the condition of her was at least 3 days. And I had 31 years of knowing where every hiding place in this station was, what the Keth monitoring covered and did not cover, and exactly how the manifests and access logs and sweep route documentation moved through the system. I had the codes. I knew the architecture. I knew the gaps. A man with a wrench and 3 decades of intimate knowledge of a building is not precisely a weapon, but he is not precisely helpless either. The first thing I did that morning was nothing, which was itself a choice. I logged my repair on 44 and filed it through the maintenance system without adding any notes. The Keth's monitoring AI processed maintenance logs on a 4-hour delay and flagged anomalies, unexpected access to sections, off-schedule visits, junction areas with recent fault histories. Conduit 7 had no fault history. My visit was scheduled as routine. It went through as routine. The second thing I did was review the sweep documentation for the day-lessee trading house clearance. I had access to the compliance port because I was rated cooperative grade A, the highest civilian rating the Keth assigned, given to workers whose institutional knowledge made them operationally useful. I had received mine without being asked and without agreeing to anything. It was simply assigned, and the access came with it. And I had not turned it down because turning it down would have drawn attention, and I needed to not draw attention. What I did with the access was my own concern. The sweep documentation for the trading house listed 14 day-lessee individuals by name and biological identifier. 12 had been processed. 2 were listed as outstanding, an adult male, day-lessee trading house resident, and a juvenile female, no identifier recorded, age estimated young. The outstanding status meant the sweep was not closed. The sweep being open meant Compliance Division would continue to route patrols through the platform levels until both outstanding subjects were located. I noted this. I noted the patrol routes, which were posted in the compliance port as an operational schedule. I noted the sections they covered and the sections they did not. Sublevel 3 was not on the patrol schedule. Sublevel 3 was rated infrastructure, access restricted to maintenance personnel with appropriate certification. The Keth had never had any reason to look there. They were an occupying force with a great deal of territory to manage and a paperwork architecture that was impressive in its scope and deeply unimaginative in its execution. They were very good at processing what they could see. They were not good at thinking about what they could not see. I had spent 31 years thinking about what you could not see. That morning I also made a small amendment to the Access Certification Registry. Not a falsification precisely, more an administrative clarification. One of the sub-level 3 maintenance bays had been listed in the registry as decommissioned pending review since before the occupation began. It had never actually been decommissioned, because decommissioning required a work order from the platform supervisor, and platform supervisors came and went, and no one had ever issued one. The bay was technically active, continued to have air and water, and a functioning floor hatch that accessed the conduit trunk directly. I updated the registry to reflect current operational status and added a note that the bay was in active use for filtration media storage, which was true. I had moved 4 canisters of filtration media in there 2 years ago and forgotten about them. It was a record. It was accurate. It changed nothing about the physical world, and it meant that the bay now had a formal purpose and formal access rights associated with it, and that any audit of sub-level access patterns that found traces of human presence in the area would have a clean, boring explanation waiting for it. I went to the commissary and got my breakfast and ate it alone, as I usually did, and I thought about what I was doing with the calm clarity that comes when a decision has already been made, and all that remains is execution. 3 days later, she was gone from the conduit and in the storage bay. I don't know how she made the move. I came down one morning and the hatch was closed again from inside. She had figured out that pushing it closed was better than leaving it hanging. And when I went through the bay access, she was there, sitting in the corner on a folded piece of insulation padding, eating from the kit I'd left by the hatch. She looked at me with those amber eyes and then looked back at her food. "Better in here," I said. She didn't answer. "There's a ventilation feed in the northeast corner," I said. "The grid is loose. It's always been loose. If you hear anything in the sub-level corridor, push it open and go into the duct. The duct runs to junction 19, which is behind the east fabrication shop. You'd come out in a locked bay. No one goes there." I showed her on the tablet the schematic of the sub-level. I didn't know if she could read a schematic. I pointed at the bay, pointed at the duct, pointed at the vent. She watched my finger. Then she looked at the schematic for a long moment, and she pointed precisely at junction 19. Her finger was very steady for a child who had been hiding in a maintenance conduit for what I now estimated was close to 2 weeks. "Yes," I said, "junction 19. She looked back at her food. I left her the schematic. Her name, I learned over the following days, was S. Siveth. It came in pieces, not from her speaking the name, but from the small things she did that eventually placed her. The Dalesi have a particular way of organizing their possessions, a kind of deliberate geometry, each item set at a specific angle to the others. I had seen it in the trading house. When I came down one morning and found the filtration media canisters arranged in a careful arc, and the insulation padding folded into an exact rectangle, and the ration kit positioned at a precise angle to the wall, I recognized it. And I remembered the name on the trading house manifest, the one under the entry for the adult male listed as the second outstanding subject. Adult male, Dalesi, trading coordinator. And below it, juvenile female, no identifier. There had been a juvenile female registered in the trading house before the sweep, under the household entry for a day lessee named Valasith. The name on the household file, the juvenile's name, was S. Sivith. I didn't tell her I knew. It wasn't my name to use. I learned other things. She communicated primarily through a sequence of small actions, objects moved, arrangements altered, the quality of her stillness when I entered the bay. When something had changed in the sublevel that concerned her, she left the ration kit positioned at a different angle. I learned to read the angle. On the fourth occasion, when the kit was off position, I did a complete sweep of the sublevel approaches and found that a compliance patrol had extended its route 2 sections closer than scheduled, apparently because one of the lower-level compliance officers had decided to be thorough. I filed a maintenance fault report on a junction in the relevant corridor, a fault that would require cabling work across 2 shifts, and the access disruption redirected the patrol route back to its previous boundary. I noted the fault as repaired 3 days later. It cost me nothing. It required only that I understood the system better than they did. On the 5th occasion the kit was off position, I arrived to find it turned completely around, facing the wall, which was a new signal I had not seen before. I went through the bay access quietly. She was at the vent grid, not in front of it, beside it, one hand on the frame, her attention angled toward the louvers with a focus I recognized as particular alertness, rather than ordinary watching. I stood still and listened. From somewhere above, through the ambient murmur of the station's infrastructure, I could make out the sound of boots moving in a systematic pattern, not the random, purposeful stride of a worker going somewhere. The methodical, section-by-section rhythm of a team doing a sweep. It was 1 level up and 2 sections east, by my estimate, but the station carried sound in ways that could surprise you. I did not speak. I went to the monitoring screen in the bay corner, a secondary feed I had routed down here 6 weeks ago, ostensibly for fault pattern analysis, and brought up the compliance port access. The sweep schedule showed no activity in the sublevel approaches for another 9 hours, but the monitoring live feed showed 2 compliance officers in the corridor on sublevel 2, the one directly above us, working east to west. They had no authorization to be there. They were either freelancing on the initiative of some lower-level coordinator or someone had issued a supplemental order that hadn't gone through the compliance port in time for my copy to update. The second possibility was the one that bothered me. I tapped through the compliance port to the supplemental orders queue. There was an entry timestamped 40 minutes ago. Expanded sweep mandate, sublevels 1 through 3, infrastructure rating suspended for this pass, 2 officer teams assigned. It had not yet propagated to the main operational schedule. I had 40 minutes of warning I had not been supposed to have. I looked at S. Sivith. She was watching me, not the vent. "They're coming," I said quietly. "Not today, but they have orders now. We have time to prepare." She looked at the schematic on the wall. I had printed it out and fixed it there with adhesive strips weeks ago because she referenced it constantly. Her gaze moved from the bay to junction 19 to the fabrication shop. Then she looked at me. "Not yet," I said. "We have time, but I need to work quickly." I sat down at the monitoring screen and started moving things. I had 3 existing fault reports open on sublevel 3 approaches, and I escalated 2 of them to critical, which triggered an automated access restriction protocol that would delay any non-certified personnel from entering the affected corridors for a minimum of 72 hours. The third I converted into a new fault on a different junction, one that straddled the approach from sublevel 2. The system flagged it, generated a hazard notice, and populated the compliance operations feed with a barrier notification. Any team checking access protocols before they entered sublevel 3 would see the notification. Whether they would check was another question, but the paperwork was now in their way, and the paperwork was real. I spent an hour after that going over every entry point to the bay and the conduit approach, checking what the monitoring cameras covered and what they didn't. The bay was not covered. It was decommissioned pending review, officially. No reason to put cameras in storage. The conduit trunk was not covered. The approach corridor had a camera at the junction 42 end, but its angle clipped the cabinet and missed the hatch. I had known all of this, but I reviewed it now with the particular clarity of a man who is no longer operating on comfortable margins but on necessity. The weeks passed. I am going to be honest about what those weeks were, because there is a temptation when people tell this kind of story to describe the time together as something it was not, as a warmth that grew, as lessons exchanged, as the child gradually opening like a flower in better weather. It was not that, or not primarily. It was a small, careful child trying to survive, and a middle-aged man trying to help her survive, in a station occupied by a force that would remove her if they found her, and penalize me if they found me harboring her. And most of what we did was be very quiet and very practical about the thing that needed to be done. That said, there were moments. She had, I discovered, an almost mechanical interest in the maintenance systems. She would follow the schematics with her finger, tracing routes through the conduit map, and at some point she began pointing to junctions and looking at me, which I understood was a question, and I would tell her what the junction did, what ran through it, where it connected. She absorbed this information with the same quiet thoroughness she applied to everything. On the third week, she pointed to a junction on the schematic and drew her finger from it in a direction I hadn't traced, which was her indicating a route I hadn't shown her, and it was a valid route. The sublevel connections she'd mapped in her head in 2 weeks with a hand-drawn schematic and whatever she could hear through the walls. I revised my estimation of S-Sevith upward. She was also, I noticed, watching the station through the ventilation grid in ways I had not anticipated. The grid had a line of sight, at a difficult angle, to a section of the platform-level approach. She would sit in front of it, not at it, not pressed against it, but at a careful distance that kept her out of any direct sightline while still allowing her to see through the louvers. She was looking for something. I knew what she was looking for. I did not know, then, whether her father was alive. The outstanding subject designation in the compliance file had not been resolved, which meant the Keth had not located him. It did not mean he was free. It meant his status was unresolved. There are a great many things whose status is unresolved in an occupation, and most of them do not resolve well. I said nothing to her about it. On the 31st day, a compliance officer named Davar came to the maintenance station and sat across from me in the small room I used as a working office, and told me that the outstanding clearance subjects from the Daylessie trading house were believed to still be within the station perimeter, and that the senior compliance coordinator had authorized an expansion of sweep coverage to include sublevels. I kept my face level. Sublevels are infrastructure, I said. Restricted access. Anyone in the sublevels without maintenance certification is going to show up in the access logs, and you'll have them within minutes. Davar looked at his tablet. We're aware of the access protocols. We're asking for cooperative assistance in conducting a physical check. Your team would lead the compliance officers through the relevant areas and indicate any anomalies. That's fine, I said. My team's schedule is posted through the cooperative access port. I'd ask you to schedule the inspection at a time that doesn't conflict with active repair operations, because we've got a critical fault on the primary water feed that I am not willing to pause for administrative reasons. There was no critical fault on the primary water feed. By the end of that afternoon, there was. Davar said they would schedule around the repair window. Good, I said. I'll have the sublevel access documentation ready. You'll need certification verification for each officer on the team, and the protocol requires a pre-inspection safety briefing for anyone without infrastructure clearance history in the relevant conduit sections. I can schedule that briefing for the morning of the inspection. I pulled out a tablet and opened the relevant protocol document. This one. You'll want to read Section 4. It covers the access restriction requirements for active fault zones. We have 3 currently open. I turned the tablet toward him. He looked at Section 4. Section 4 was 47 pages long. I had not written Section 4. It was a genuine legacy protocol from the original station construction. But I knew it intimately, and I knew what was in it, and I knew that a compliance officer who had not spent 31 years in infrastructure maintenance would find it deeply unhelpful. Davar said he would review it and be in touch. He did not come back for 4 days. When he came back, he had read Section 4, or at least enough of it to be frustrated, and he had a second tablet with him showing an updated sweep mandate that superseded the access restriction protocol. He told me the new mandate had been authorized at the divisional level, which meant above Malin, which meant above Davar, which meant someone with enough rank to override a standing infrastructure protocol on their own authority. I looked at the updated mandate. I noted the authorization signature. I noted the effective date, which was in 48 hours. I'll need your officers certified for the relevant conduit sections, I said. Section 4, subsection 12. Any officer entering an active conduit junction area without a current pressure systems orientation is a liability risk to the station. That's not my rule, it's the original construction charter, and the Keth Operational Oversight Committee signed onto the construction charter standards in the first month of occupation. Your mandate supersedes the access restriction, but it doesn't supersede the orientation requirement. I showed him the construction charter citation. It was 11 years older than Section 4 and considerably harder to override. He made a call. The call took 20 minutes. The result of the call was a temporary authorization to waive the orientation requirement for the sweep, subject to the inspection being conducted with a certified maintenance worker present, meaning one of my crew members, meaning me or someone I assigned, meaning a member of my team would be physically present for every minute of every sub-level search. Fine, I said. Schedule it after the repair window on the water feed, 2 days minimum. The fault is still active. He left. I extended the fault. I went home because my shift was over, and I sat in my apartment on the 4th residential level, and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about what I had and what I needed and what I was willing to do. What I had: a child in a storage bay in sub-level 3, 9 weeks into a concealment that it held because I understood the monitoring architecture and the patrol routing better than the people running them. Access to the compliance documentation port, which gave me the sweep schedules and the fault log review procedures, and the form architecture I'd been using to quietly route compliance away from the areas I needed them away from. 31 years of institutional memory, every exit, every redundant access, every corridor that technically existed in the older physical infrastructure but had been administratively erased when the station was recertified. The station's physical reality was more complex than its documentation. The Keth only knew the documentation. What I needed: to get the child out of the station before the expanded sweep reached sub-level 3, which, at the pace they were moving, would happen in somewhere between 4 days and 8 days, depending on whether Davar's coordinator decided to prioritize or deprioritize the infrastructure search relative to other compliance activities. I was betting, from what I knew of how Compliance Division operated, that they would deprioritize. They had a dozen active sweeps across the station's residential and commercial levels, and sub-levels were unglamorous and physically inconvenient and unlikely to yield results. And compliance officers who do not find anything spend less time in unpleasant environments. I was betting my continued freedom, and the child's, on their preference for the comfortable work over the thorough work. It was a reasonable bet. The harder problem was transit. Heron Station's primary exits were checkpointed. Every departure, every cargo manifest, every maintenance vehicle leaving the station perimeter required Keth-issued documentation. A de lessee juvenile with no transit permit, no registered identity in the compliance system, and an outstanding clearance designation was not going to walk through a checkpoint. I needed a route that didn't go through the checkpoints. The station had 3 such routes, all of them administrative ghosts. 2 were emergency evacuation conduits from the station's original construction, sealed with plates that had been bolted over them when the secondary exits were put in. The 3rd was a maintenance access tunnel that ran under the cargo staging area to a junction on the outer hull, used during the initial installation for external equipment access and afterward used intermittently for heavy equipment ingress before the main cargo doors were expanded. The tunnel had been listed as decommissioned in the recertification. I knew it was not decommissioned because I had been through it twice in the last 5 years to check the seal integrity, and the seals were intact. The tunnel's outer junction connected to the station's cargo staging apron, outside the perimeter wall. 40 meters of unsheltered ground to the outer fence, and the outer fence had gaps at the northeast corner where the groundwork had settled, and the base of the fence had lifted 3 centimeters off the ground, enough for a small child to go under. I had noticed this gap 4 months ago. I had not repaired it because it was not in my section's responsibility. I had not reported it because no one had asked. I planned for 2 days. I went to work. I managed my team. I processed the compliance documentation that came through the cooperative port and used it to route the sweep teams as I had been routing them, with subtle amendments to their schedule that were always explicable as operational necessity if anyone looked closely. No one looked closely. I kept the maintenance fault on the primary water feed active and expanding, a real fault at this point, because I had introduced an actual pressure anomaly that required actual repair work, which gave my team genuine reason to occupy the staging area adjacent to the maintenance tunnel for the duration of a repair window. On the 36th day, during a repair window between 200 and 600, S. Siveth walked through the maintenance tunnel, across 40 meters of staging apron, and through the gap in the northeast corner of the outer fence. She was not alone. I had spent some of those 2 days finding someone to meet her on the other side, which was the part I could not do myself because I had a job and a residence, and a cooperative grade A rating that placed me inside the station by definition. There was a transport collective that operated along the cargo route 3 kilometers from the station, informal, cautious, the kind of organization that exists in occupation zones, and has no name and no address, and operates entirely on the recommendation of people who know people. I reached them through a purchasing agent who handled off-manifest supplies for the station commissary, and who owed me a favor I had not previously called in. I called it in. I did not watch her go through the tunnel. I was on the other side of the staging area with 2 members of my team working on the pressure fault, visible, logged, doing exactly what the maintenance schedule said I was doing. I had left the tunnel access unlocked at 1:45 when my work light was pointing away from that part of the staging area, and at 2:20 I heard, through the ambient noise of the repair work, a sound that was nothing, a nothing that had previously been a something, the faint presence of a small organism in a space, now absent. I kept working. At 600 the repair window closed. I logged the fault as partially resolved, requiring a follow-up inspection in 48 hours, and I went home. The compliance sweep of sublevel 3 happened on the 40th day. 2 officers and a monitoring technician, led by one of my junior crew. The storage bay was clean. The filtration media canisters were arranged in a neat row against the west wall. The insulation padding was stacked on a shelf. The ration kits I had been restocking every few days were absent because I had stopped stocking them 3 days after she left. The officers found nothing. The monitoring technician found nothing. My crew member found a loose vent grid in the northeast corner and logged it as a maintenance fault requiring attention. I repaired it myself, the following morning, in the first unscheduled sublevel access I had logged in 41 days. Life for a time was very quiet. I want to be precise about the interval, because it matters. 7 weeks and 4 days passed between the morning I repaired the vent grid, and the morning sub-coordinator Malin of the compliance division called me into her office. I had not spent those weeks in any particular anxiety. I had gone to work. I had managed my team. I had processed my maintenance schedule and filed my documentation, and attended the cooperative briefings that compliance division held every 3 weeks for grade A workers, at which I sat in the back row and listened to operational updates and answered questions about station infrastructure with the careful helpfulness of a man who has nothing to hide. I had, I suppose, been waiting, because a man who knows what he's done knows that consequences rarely fail to arrive, but I had not been waiting with dread. I had made my choices with my eyes open. The waiting was simply time. What had found me eventually was not the tunnel and not the vent grid and not the amended access certification registry. It was the purchasing agent. The purchasing agent, who had left the station 3 weeks after S. Seavith went through the fence, had been detained at a transit checkpoint on a different station 700 kilometers along the cargo route, on an unrelated matter, an off-manifest supply discrepancy from 2 years prior that had nothing to do with me. In the process of that detention, the Keth compliance team had reviewed the agent's communication logs and found the communication that had connected them to the transport collective. The transport collective had their own problems by then, and one of their problems led, through a chain of links I did not fully understand and was not fully told, back to a passenger they had moved approximately 10 weeks prior, a small day lessee juvenile, and from there to the station of origin. The chain was thin. It took 7 weeks and 4 days to complete, but it completed. Malin was a heavy-set woman with the flat, careful eyes of someone who had done this work long enough to be competent at it and long enough to be tired of it. She had a file open on the desk when I came in. She did not invite me to sit down. I sat down anyway, because standing seemed performative. "Do you know why you're here, Veth?" "I can make a reasonable guess." She looked at me. "The day lessee juvenile, S. Seavith Valaseth. She was in your section of the station for an estimated 40 days. She was concealed, provisioned, and ultimately assisted in exiting the station through a non-documented access route. Do you dispute any of that?" "No," I said. "You're admitting to unsanctioned harbor of a clearance subject." "I'm admitting I helped a child." She was quiet for a moment. There was a very specific quality to the quiet, not surprise and not anger, but something that might have been the faint, careful attention of a person hearing something they expected and something they didn't expect at the same time. "The penalty." "I know the penalty," I said. "I've read the occupation bulletin. I can quote the relevant section if you'd like." She did not want me to quote it. I put a document case on her desk. It was a physical case, paper printouts, organized with tabs. I had assembled it over the previous 2 months during the quiet interval with the same patience I applied to everything. That is a complete record of every administrative action I took to conceal the child and manage compliance division's awareness of her location, I said. Every form amendment, every maintenance fault I introduced to redirect sweep patterns, every access log adjustment, every schedule modification I filed that altered your patrol routes in the sub-level vicinity. It is organized chronologically. Each entry identifies the specific compliance documentation I was working from and the specific amendment I made. The cover sheet has a summary. She was looking at the case the way people look at things they do not immediately understand. "Why are you?" "Because I want it on record," I said. "You asked who was sheltering her. I'm giving you a complete answer, not the short version, the full version. Every decision I made documented with my certification attached. I did this. I knew what I was doing. I want the record to reflect that I knew what I was doing." She opened the case and looked at the cover sheet. She read it. She turned to the first tab. She read for a long time. I sat in my chair and watched the window behind her, which looked out over the cargo apron, and thought about nothing in particular. The light was coming in at a low angle late morning light, and the apron was busy with cargo movement, and it looked very much like what it was, a working station, going about its business, indifferent to the small things happening inside the walls. "This is remarkably thorough," she said finally. "I'm a thorough man." She looked at me over the case. "What do you expect to happen now?" "My cooperative rating revoked. Probably administrative detention. Loss of position, certainly. The Keth won't keep a grade A facilities coordinator who spent 40 days running counter-surveillance against compliance division." I thought about it. "I expect you'll want to look at my personnel file before you decide on specifics. I've been in this role a long time. There are systems in this station that I understand and my team does not fully understand. You'll want to think about continuity before you pull my access." It was not a threat. It was practical advice. She seemed to understand the distinction. She paged through the document case for another few minutes, moving more slowly than she had the first time, not reading for the information now but looking at the structure of it. I recognized what she was doing. She was looking for gaps, for the inconsistency that would tell her the record was incomplete, that there was something I hadn't disclosed. She was doing it automatically, the reflex of her profession. She wasn't going to find a gap. I had spent 2 months making certain of that. "The primary water feed," she said. "The fault that ran across the repair window on day 36. "Yes." "That fault was introduced." "Yes." "The follow-up inspection on day 38 was genuine repair work. The fault I introduced was closed. The system is currently operating normally." "But it's documentation you filed." "It's documentation I filed, yes. I have marked it in the record with a note explaining the introduction and the repair. I have also flagged 2 other maintenance faults in the record that were operational rather than introduced. I want the audit to be clean." She sat back. She looked at the case on her desk as though it had done something to her she hadn't anticipated. "You're not afraid," she said. "I'm 52 years old," I said. "I've worked in this station since I was 21. I found a child hiding behind a junction valve in a maintenance conduit and I helped her. I'm not interested in pretending otherwise." I stood. "I'll be in my office when you've made a decision. My certification is current through the end of the month, and I'd prefer to finish the Conduit 7 secondary inspection before it's suspended, but that's a preference, not a condition." I walked out. What happened in the next 3 days, I know partly from what I experienced and partly from what was told to me later. Malin reviewed the case. She forwarded it to the senior compliance coordinator, a man named Voss who I had never met directly and knew only as the source of the directives that came through the cooperative briefings. Voss, apparently, sat with the case for a full day before he did anything. What he did, eventually, was route the case to the station's Operational Oversight Committee, which was a Keth administrative body, not a punitive one, rather than to the Detention Processing Unit. The distinction mattered procedurally. The Operational Oversight Committee's concern was exactly what I had predicted: continuity. I was the only person in the station, including the Keth officers, who fully understood the water and air systems architecture as it actually existed, including the parts that had drifted from documentation over 3 decades. The committee asked Malin to determine whether any critical infrastructure knowledge would be lost if my access were suspended immediately. Malin, I am told, spent half a day reviewing the maintenance documentation with my second-in-command, and reported that there were approximately 60 operational procedures for which I was the only person with complete knowledge, and that transferring that knowledge would take an estimated 4 to 6 weeks. I was placed under a cooperation agreement rather than detention. My cooperative rating was suspended pending review, which meant I lost the compliance board access that had, among other things, allowed me to manage their patrol routes for 40 days. My physical access to the station remained intact. I continued to go to work. I was told, through the cooperation agreement documentation, that my case would be reviewed at the end of the knowledge transfer period, and that the outcome would be determined by the senior compliance coordinator's assessment of my cooperation during that period. I cooperated. I transferred the knowledge. I spent 4 weeks writing the most detailed technical documentation the station's maintenance archive had ever seen, every informal procedure, every undocumented junction, every place where physical reality differed from the registered schematics. I wrote the procedures for the junction valve replacement sequences that my team had been learning by watching me for years. I documented the sub-level access patterns, the pressure fault diagnostic flowcharts, the seal inspection schedules that I carried, until then, entirely in my head. I sat with my second-in-command, a competent young woman named Oris who had been with me for 6 years and who was, I suspected, going to be considerably more competent in another 6, and I walked her through every system until she could answer questions I had not yet asked her, every administrative ghost, every tunnel. I gave them the tunnel. I did not give them the transport collective, because I did not know the transport collective. The purchasing agent who had connected me knew them, and I did not know the purchasing agent's source, and the purchasing agent had left the station on legitimate business 3 weeks after Siveth had gone through the fence and had not returned, and I did not know where they were. There was nothing to give in that direction, even if I had wanted to. At the end of the knowledge transfer period, Voss reviewed my case. He revoked my cooperative grade a rating permanently. He reassigned me to my current position, which, in the particular logic of Keth administrative structure, was a demotion in title but not in function. I remained the chief infrastructure coordinator for the station, because there was no one else who could do the job, but I was reclassified from a cooperative asset to a managed civilian specialist, which meant more monitoring and fewer privileges, and the same actual work. It was the outcome of a bureaucracy trying to be punitive toward a person it could not afford to punish fully. I found it mildly satisfying. The station manager at the time of all this was a Keth administrator named Sarath. Sarath was rotated out of the station 8 months after the cooperation agreement was signed, as part of a standard administrative rotation. The new station manager, a younger Keth official who had been assigned to Harran as what the Keth system called an integration role, meaning she was there to manage the transition towards civilian self-administration that was then ongoing, as the occupation authority decided that direct management of mid-tier stations was not worth the cost, was named Peleth. Peleth reviewed the staff roster on her first day, saw my classification, read the cooperation agreement summary, and came to find me in the maintenance station. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room, which has not changed much in 30 years. Banks of monitoring screens, diagnostic tablets, a desk buried in printouts and schematics, the shelf with the service manuals for systems, some of which no longer exist, the coffee maker that has been broken since 2019 and which I repair every few months when I'm bored, and which breaks again out of what I can only assume is spite. "You're Veth," she said. "I am. You managed to redirect Compliance Division patrol routes for 40 days using the fault reporting system. Among other methods, yes." She considered this for a moment. "That's the maintenance office." "It's been my maintenance office for 31 years. 33 now." She looked at the room again. She was young for a station manager, young enough that I was, in the particular way of the very experienced looking at the competent young, cautiously impressed by her. "The integration plan calls for civilian leadership of station administration within 18 months, she said. "The station manager role transitions to civilian appointment. The appointment process is managed by the Platform Council." A pause. "Your cooperation agreement expires at the end of this quarter." "I know when it expires." "The Platform Council will be looking for candidates who have demonstrated commitment to the station's operational continuity," she said, "and who have institutional knowledge." I looked at her for a moment. "Are you suggesting I run for station manager?" I'm suggesting you might be a strong candidate, given your record. My record includes 40 days of running counter-surveillance against the occupation authority. Your record, she said carefully, includes an extensive and thoroughly documented contribution to infrastructure continuity that the station relies on. The counter-surveillance portion of the record is noted. It's also 8 months old, in the context of a station that has not had a single infrastructure failure during your tenure under the cooperation agreement. She was, I realized, more interesting than she had initially appeared. I'll think about it, I said. She left. I went back to my monitoring screens. I did not think about it for long. I had other things on my mind because of what had happened 2 days prior. 2 days before Pelath arrived, I had received a message through the station's civilian mail system, routed through 2 commercial addresses and a trading house mailbox that I recognized, eventually, as Daylessy. The message was in common tongue, brief, written, with the compressed economy of someone who had learned the language as a second language and used only what was necessary. It said, "We are coming through the Harran Junction. 3 weeks. There is a debt." I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you about the morning they arrived, because it is the part of this that I find most difficult to describe accurately. The Daylessy mother's name was Valasith, the same name as the household file, the entry under which S. Sivith had been registered. She was tall, as Daylessy adults are, and her skin was gray but darker than S. Sivith's, a deeper charcoal with a very faint blue undertone, and her eyes were the same amber. She came through the main entrance during the morning transit period with 2 adult companions, and a transit clearance that was legitimate. The occupation authority had been issuing Daylessy transit permits for 3 months by then, as part of the administrative normalization that was accompanying the integration process. She came to the station manager's office, which at that point was mine, and she stood in the doorway with the quality of stillness that I had come to recognize as a Daylessy adult's version of a controlled situation. Everything very quiet, very deliberate, each movement decided before it was made. "Sorenveth," she said. "Yes." "My daughter is well," she said. "She is with her father. He survived." I had not known about the father. I said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and the information required a moment to settle. "She told us what you did," Valasith said. "All of it, the conduit, the bay, the tunnel." She drew the schematic. A pause. She drew it from memory. "She has a very good memory." "Yes." Something crossed Valasith's face that was not quite a smile and was not quite something else. A Daylessy expression I did not have a name for, something that might be grief and pride and precision all at once. "She said to tell you that junction 19 was correct." I felt the thing in my chest that I had been keeping orderly for 11 months shift and resettle. "Junction 19 was correct," I confirmed. Valasith came into the office and set something on my desk. A small object, a carved piece of pale wood in a shape I did not immediately recognize, set at a precise angle to the edge of the desk, in the way her daughter had arranged things in the storage bay. The carving was of a junction valve. It was meticulous. The detail was extraordinary. "She made it," Valasith said. "She made it from memory as well." I looked at the valve. It was, I thought, a better rendering of a junction valve than I had ever seen, and I had been looking at junction valves for 33 years. "She wants to study systems engineering," Valasith said. "She has a place at the Technical Institute on Varath Prime. She begins in the fall." "Good," I said. "She'll be good at it." There was a moment between us, not the wordless understanding of people who had been through something together, because we had not been through it together. She had been elsewhere, in danger and separation, and whatever she had survived on her side of the wall while I had been managing manifests and fault reports on mine. It was something different. The acknowledgement, maybe, between 2 people who had each done what they could with what they had, in the same situation at the same time, without knowing the other was doing it. I offered her tea, because it was 900 and I had a working coffee maker, which was unusual, and tea was what I had. She sat, we drank. Her companions waited outside. She asked about the station, not about the occupation, not about the future of the integration process, but about the station itself, its systems, its history. She was, I discovered, an infrastructure specialist, had been before the occupation disrupted everything, water and atmospheric systems specifically. I showed her the monitoring screens. I talked her through the conduit architecture. I showed her the junction maps. At junction 44, on the schematic, I saw her finger stop. "This one," she said. "That's where I found her," I said. She looked at the junction for a long time. Then she moved her finger to junction 19. "And this is where she would have gone," she said. "Yes." She looked at the screen for another moment. Then she looked at me. I do not have a good account of what was in her face in that moment. She is Daylessy, and I am human, and we do not share an emotional vocabulary that maps cleanly. But I have been reading faces for 52 years, and I will tell you what I saw. She was a mother, and she was looking at the man who had kept her daughter alive in a maintenance conduit for 40 days, and she was holding all of that at once with the particular composure of someone who has learned, the hard way, that composure is the only vessel that reliably holds. "Thank you," she said. It was the simple version. It stood for everything underneath. "She was easy to help," I said. "She was very careful." Valasith made the sound that I had come to understand later was Daylessy for something that is not quite a laugh and not quite grief, but something between the two. She has always been very careful. They stayed through the afternoon. I showed them the maintenance station, the sublevel, the storage bay. The filtration media canisters were still in their arc along the west wall because I had not rearranged them. Valasith looked at the arrangement and then looked at me, and I said, "I didn't move them," and she made the sound again. They left at 1700, catching the evening transit. At the door, Valasith turned back. "The platform council," she said. "My companions on this trip are traders. They have been on Harran for many years before your time even. They have a voice with the platform council." "I know who they are," I said. She considered me. "The station needs someone who knows where junction 19 is." "The station needs someone who knows where all the junctions are," I said. "Yes," she paused. "Esivith knows where junction 19 is." I thought about that. "She's going to Varath Prime," I said. "In the fall. She could come back." Valasith smiled. It was, I realized, the first full smile I had seen from her in 8 hours of conversation, and it was worth the wait. "She could come back," she agreed. I stood in the doorway of the station manager's office, which was, as of 2 weeks prior, in a platform council vote that I had not campaigned for and had been told about afterward, formally my office. And I watched them cross the station toward the transit gate, 3 tall gray figures in the afternoon light, and I thought about a small child sitting in the corner of a storage bay, eating a ration bar, drawing the sublevel schematic from memory. Junction 19 was correct. I went back to my monitoring screens. The carved junction valve is on the desk where Valasith put it. I leave it at the angle Esivith's mother set it. Because I have come to understand that the angle means something, and whatever it means, it seems right. I keep it there.